learning and how students learn is how we're going to be addressing these articles. And I picked three good articles discussing how students learn. The first article is by Allison Black, and it talks about Generation Y, who they are and how they learn. So this author starts out, and she says that she spent 20 years as an educator, and she said she did this faculty leadership pilot program where I would say that would be where she had to interview administrators. So she was kind of moving up in the ranks. So she probably did this program where she had to interview administrators. And a lot of them started saying, well, students are changing and students are acting different in the field of education. So she said, well, okay, well, why are they acting different? So she started looking at the research on there and then wanted to talk about that. And this just does a really good job because it shows you the difference between the generations. And one thing it said was it talked about Generation Y and Generation X and the millennials, which are the new generation that are emerging. And she said we're just going to call all of these people Generation Y. So the Generation X, Generation Y, and the millennials. So people who are born in the 80s, 70s, the 80s, people who are born in the 80s and 90s, all those are going to be known as Generation Y. She called it. So real simple. She pulled two tables from other researchers that talked about the difference between people who were born in the older generation and people who were born in what she's now defining as Generation Y. She said that if you look at these tables, you'll see that, I mean, you can look at all of this, you can break it apart, presumed heterosexual, all sexual orientations, Caucasians, all races, majority were men. So it shows you the breakdown, the difference here. But she said one thing that she saw that was important was increasing number of immigrants and just mainly the key word she kept wanting to say is diversity. So I kept seeing that. As you also bring down here, it says student population in higher education has shifted from U.S. native born to a mix of many nationalities based upon the increasing number and variety of immigrants to this country. Today's college students, unlike their counterparts 40 years ago, are also from diverse cultural, economic, and geographic backgrounds. She goes, why is this important to note? And it says, as institutions of higher education or colleges consider how best to meet the needs of their students, they will need to adapt policies and practices based on realistics of their diverse student bodies. So the key word we write there is diversity. She does another chart that is a little bit, to me, I was like, wow, I can't believe she actually said this. But look, low debt after college, high debt and defaults on loans after colleges. So that's a good research study that I would like to see one day, would be the comparison of student loan debt from the 60s to now and how it's ballooned, but no one's done that yet. Also, privilege to attend college and expectation to attend college, or an entitlement. And then she also mentions that today's people are growing problem of obesity. But here's where the article really just takes off, and I really like this idea. She starts classifying people as digital native, kind of like Native Americans, but now so Native Americans means that you were here in America when the Europeans came. So what she's saying is when the computers came, you were already part of the computers. So these are digital natives, she is saying, are people who were born and raised with computers, and what she classifies the computers as the microprocessor. So the birth of the microprocessor. And that would mean handheld laptops, handheld phones, GPS devices, and items such as that. And this is where she says the disconnect is we're having what are known as digital natives, or the Generation Y, and they are learning stuff at a rapid pace, that they process information differently. Now this is where it kind of gets into a weird part of the article. She actually makes the point that students who are digital natives learn differently than the old school generation that learned from paper and pencil. There's not much research to back that. However, she's kind of basing it on common sense. And I could see that. She says that they have a linear learning. So for example, if a student wants to know something about the Empire State Building, they will go to Google, and then they will connect to there, and they'll go to Wikipedia, and then they'll connect to there, and then they'll spring from that. So it's a straight shot. While the old generation would take a longer route and a longer conceptual map So they may take a book and they read up on the Empire State Building, which connects them to other readings and they learn it that way. It would be a longer learning process, but it would be a more meaningful learning process. However, it would be limited. So a person might say, I'm going to go on a trip to the Empire State Building and read a book on it and learn all about it, and then go to the Empire State Building, and they've spent probably an hour or two reading the book, and then they've done that. Meanwhile, a person might be in New York City and go, okay, I'm just going to Google it real quick. So who had the bigger learning? So that's what she talks about, was instantaneous hypertext, downloading music. So basically instant gratification for knowledge. However, how deep is that knowledge that someone is receiving? She would make the argument that it's not that deep. So it's a very interesting topic here. It's not supported very strong on research though. So I kind of, for example, look at this paragraph right here. There's no site. So she talks about digital natives, flute and inquiring, and then digital natives, and then she goes into the Fran 2006. So all of that's just, I would rather see more stronger research. So that'd be something very interesting, is do digital natives learn deeper or shallower than people who have to, and that's a very interesting topic. I like that. I really like that idea. I mean, it shows some right here. Instead of reading books, I'm looking on my phone. Yes, but the phone's going to only give you, the phone can go deep into knowledge, but is the user going deep into knowledge? That's the question. It is no wonder then that the faculty and administration in higher education ought to feel like digital immigrants, meaning that the faculty who come in, they go, well, I don't understand all of this. And then she uses the term silver surfers, people who are adapting to the technology. Now, with that, I don't know how strong you can make that argument that old school people who are just learning the internet are having trouble, because what that's doing is that's saying that, so bear with me on this explanation, that the Generation Y people were born in this technology and therefore they were raised in this technology. Well, that's fine. But she's also trying to make the argument that the silver surfers are adopting or adapting to this. I would disagree with that, because she's trying to paint the picture that the silver surfers are waking up in 2010 and saying, I need to learn all of this technology now. Because a true professor and a true education person, you've been using technology ever since it was, the microcompressor came in. And that was the issue, is I don't see it as we're trying to catch up. I see it as we're learning as we go. So if that makes any sense, I'll give you more of a real world example. These professors who she is calling the silver surfers, they probably had email come in around 1997. They probably had the internet come in on Windows 3.11 probably around 2000. So they were not new to this today. So I don't think the divide between their knowledge is that big. But she does make some interesting points at saying that the Generation Y has a more superficial concept of intimacy and social networks, but once again, not supported by research. But she does try to end this up, and she says that digital natives serves as ambassadors who are bringing cultures. Yet for all these definitions of Generation Y, like other generations, there are many exceptions and contradictions. For example, Generation Y students are aware of body image and well are informed about diet and exercise, but trends indicate that 1/3 of them will be obese by 2013. Okay, so where is she getting this comment right here, that Generation Ys are aware of body image? Where's the research backing that? Interesting topic, but then she kind of summed it up by saying, okay, so what do we need to do now? And then she goes, okay, so there is a difference. And I will agree that Generation Y is different. They have better technology, and the silver surfers are trying to catch up. She does say that Skinner mentioned in 1954, one of our leading researchers, says that Skinner, the most famous behavioral psychologist, declared that humans were on the brink of great change and that an extensive revision of educational practices was inevitable. And that is true. In 1954, those changes have occurred, suggesting that programmed learning and testing machines form a part of an overall improvement of teaching techniques. And I like this. This is a real good quote. At a session of the 2002 National Learning Infrastructural Initiative, a faculty member asked two students, what is the most difficult thing about being a student these days? The students had the same answer, having to sit through a class lecture without being able to check email, surf the web, or listen to music. Another participant asked the faculty member, how would you have answered that? And the faculty member thought for a moment and said, I would have answered calculus. Okay, so what they're saying is that students want instant gratification if they become bored in learning. All right. So the article has a good point, and it concludes with, and it continues on, and you read more of it, it concludes with, well, how can we address this? And it says that technology needs to be integrated into education lessons, that teachers need to be more fluid. I agree with that, but also it's a give and take. Generation Y needs to also adapt to the old way of immersion into a material. Now, I'm not saying that we need to go old school and have, this is the way it's going to be, but the students are not brainwashed into this technology where they have to, no matter what, learn, by using a cell phone or a computer. However, we can find a good middle ground with this, that teachers can use technology in their classroom, they can use YouTube videos and anything like that that's going to grab their attention, but the students are also going to have to adapt and realize that the learning that they have on their cell phones, which is a quick Wikipedia access, is superficial at best, and that there's a greater learning by going into some of the great books and to go into some of the research and spend your time learning. So, and that's what we call, a key word is not in this reading, differentiated instruction. And that's what we need, differentiated instruction. So a really good article, and I thought y'all might like that. And the conclusion says that teachers should change, and it says right here, despite the relentless focus on technology is not really what is important. It is the educational and social implications of the technology. Therefore, as students become increasingly physically isolated, as well as demanding of and dependent upon technology, university administrations may need to consider selecting faculty for their empathy and guidance skills as much as for their content expertise. So that means students, she actually makes an argument that students who depend on technology actually are becoming isolated, and that we need to pull them out of that isolation. I like that. It's a very good point. I like that very much. That's the first article, and it's a really good article. As we go, so tell me what you think about that. Now, you are graduate students, obviously. So with graduate students, we've read this first article, real simple, and we've looked at it, and you've made notes, and you get a general idea. So as a graduate student, what I would want you to do to get out of this class, and especially getting out of this is a real simple technique for graduate students so that you can have a really good conversation, is remember the name Allison Black. Remember the year. So let's find the year, if I can find it. It's usually on here somewhere. 2010. Educational Horizons. So just kind of remember that, and so whenever you're having a conversation with someone and they're saying, okay, students are different, and students are different and they don't understand and they can't figure that out at all, then what you would want to do is you would want to say, well, Allison Black in 2010 in Educational Horizons had a really good article about the divide between Generation Y and what she called as the Silver Surfers. And you're like, what? And they'd be like, wow. And you say, well, that's the phrase. And so it's just a really good way to show that you've been reading. So instead of reading an article like an undergrad student and going, okay, I got that, remember the name. Allison Black, 2010 Educational Horizons, Silver Surfers, and you can really put that in your head, and it's going to be something that you can kind of memorize. It also helps for your comprehensive exams if you can quote stuff like that. So if someone on comprehensive exams, and you get a test question that says, how can technology help education, you could actually bring up Silver Surfers, you could bring up Generation Y, and then you can say, well, Allison Black talked about it in 2010 Educational Horizons. So just memorizing 2010 Educational Horizons, Allison Black, and connecting that mentally in your head with Silver Surfers, then you've got a connection there that could ultimately make a very good, strong paper. Really easy to do. So it's kind of a fun article. I really like that article, and I hope you did as well. As you scroll down, I've got two other articles that I'll let you read on your own. I picked the first article the best because I really liked it. But the second article talks about Vietnam because I wanted to put this article in here to give you a better perspective. I don't want us to think that everybody in school is using technology. This is talking about Vietnam and how they are trying their best to get better education in a very poor environment. So we don't want to go crazy with Generation Y and throw in technology everywhere when the majority of the world is still doing they have no technology and they're still doing the basic lecture format. So this article kind of slaps you in the face and lets you realize that there are people who are still doing other education systems, and they're still way behind what we would consider and what they call Western educational practices. Now, of course, you know the history of Vietnam because you're social studies students, and this talks about, and it gives you the Vietnamese educational context. Really good thing to read. You may want to read this. It talks about the long history of respect and dedication to education based on the Confucian ideas. Just that sentence right there can help you understand the Vietnam culture. Many writers have noticed that the Confucian tradition places a strong emphasis on book learning, academic and theoretical engagement. So when you go to Vietnam and you're seeing their education system, you're seeing it tied into Confucianism, which is learning books. I would say education in America has gotten away from that, definitely. Our own observation, so a real good thing. I studied one time South Korea's education model. So you may want to study other countries to see how they're doing. As you scroll down, and you'll see why are more active learners, Western perspectives, perspectives from childhood studies, and it continues on. And it gives you an education, and this is really based on a grant they had received, and they were going out to the schools and they were trying to educate. And they talked about the surveys they were doing, the research aim and movements. So this is kind of a research study, so I want to scroll down to the discussion section and get down to the actual. This is how the Vietnamese children explanations on how they learn. Children tended to refer to what they had learned on a description of the steps required to perform the task. Many children had difficulty offering explanations of the learning process, so Vietnamese children were more about what they learned, like calculus, like mathematics, science, than the way they learned. These difficulties children experience in describing learning processes no doubt reflect the emphasis in schools on didactic instruction and the lack of variety and strategies employed to help children learn. The main focus of how these children learned at school was through lectures and instructions together with the use of textbooks. Teaching was primarily construed as content delivery. So there was nothing about looking at the content and looking at the material. It was about, here is the content, you should learn this. So basically rote memorization. Children's reflections on involvement in research, giving young learners opportunities to think and talk about aspects of teaching and learning can directly influence their metacognitive development and their understanding of how they learn. This small-scale study, which engaged rural Vietnamese children in conversations about how they learned, was structured to contribute to such development. When asked how they felt about their involvement in the research, a significant number of children focused on the learning outcomes for them as a result of being involved in the project. When participating in the project, I will understand my studying. I learn about subjects. I learn how to talk. We learn not only at home, but also at school. Since learning is the Vietnamese context, it's constructed as formal activity. So the article makes sure it makes a very clear point that learning in Vietnam is based on sitting down and learning. So the Vietnamese culture has yet to get to what we call the lifelong learning step, where children aren't realizing that they can learn all the time and that learning occurs all the time. Now, I'm not saying that they go home and they shut it off, but when an American person goes home and they want to learn something, they recognize that they're still learning, so they put a lot of dedication to that. A Vietnamese child will go to school to learn, and then when they go home, they may still learn, but they're not recognizing that they're learning, and they're not putting the scientific method into that. That's what this article is discussing, that they have not associated being home and learning, so little aspects of that. Now, you can fast forward that to parents. Today's parents in America are very dedicated to helping their children learn. Is that going on at home in the Vietnamese culture, or do they just see that school is where you learn? Little things like that. So learning is very important, and this is a really good article that gives you that. Look at this. Right here says, the small-scale study referred in the paper has revealed that deeply embedded cultural understandings of children and of learning together with a lack of focus on learning process will need to be taken into account in efforts to achieve quality educational provision in rural Vietnam. Very simple paragraph or sentence right there, but it explains something that's very critical. If you're going to learn and you're going to teach in another country, you need to understand the cultural aspect. But let's take that to America. If you're going to teach in a culturally different school system, you need to understand the culture. Very simple. All right, so the next one, look at the references they use. They use a lot of references. I like that. So the next one's a very easy article. It talks about, do films make you learn? This is a big movement now, especially in social studies. There's a guy named Russell who's written several books in Florida about this. This is the big thing about movies and how we can do this. It's a very popular topic. Films and social studies is becoming a major element of research. I get it. I like it. But it's definitely, people are riding this wave pretty hard. And they're riding it because film is very available now. Very available. And this is a very good article. It talks about moving pictures today dominate not only the entertainment. So what I would like for you to do is I want you to just read this article. You've already read all three of them, but read this article and give me a synopsis of it. Give me how you felt about it. You've seen how I've broken down two previous articles. So as a graduate student, break down this one for me. What did you learn? And go in depth. The next thing I want you to do is what we're going to be focusing on next week, and that is learning styles. I want you to look up Erickson's 8 stages. Erickson's 8 stages. Read up on that one, and I'm going to send you some literature, and we're going to really look at that one. We're seeing that learning styles are different. We're seeing that learning styles are different. Let me show you some of the researchers, some of the famous people like Erickson who talks about the 8 stages. So let's look at that definitely. So for your homework, real simple, break this down, send me a Word document through email, give me a breakdown, a summary of this one as a graduate student, really get into this article, just this article right here. Then, here's the hard part. I want you to APA cite this. On your Word document somewhere, give me a perfect APA citation for this article. You can do it. And then I want you to go ahead and prepare yourself for Erickson. Go ahead and Google that, see if you can find some stuff, and I'm going to send you some articles Monday or Tuesday about Erickson. If you have any questions, just send me an email. I hope you like this. That's the whole point of this, is we're trying to get in the idea of how people learn.